Hi, this is Wendy, and in this series of videos, we're learning how to create dynamic pages using Thymeleaf. In the first video, we learned how to use model attributes to send data from your controller to your output pages. In this video, we'll learn how to use Thymeleaf to display that data within your HTML code. And in the last video, we'll learn how to use form binding to access those same model attributes on your input forms too. Now, Thymeleaf is pretty big, there's a lot to cover, and we haven't been given all that much time to do it in. In the web notes for this lesson, which as always I'll link to in the video description, you'll find a couple of links to the Thymeleaf documentation and also a really good tutorial that will help you learn a lot more about Thymeleaf and what I'm going to be able to cover in this video. Now, so far we've been able to display model attributes and request parameters on the output page, but the way we did it using those square brackets is not always going to allow us to do what we want. Plus, it's actually a bad way to output model data because there's no fallback code to appear if things go wrong. We can have a bit more power and flexibility over our output pages by using Thymeleaf. Now, Thymeleaf is a template engine. It allows you to take normal HTML code and add special attributes to make our pages display dynamic content. You'll use HTML and Thymeleaf to create a template, and then Thymeleaf will fill in the data for you as it's processed on the server. The plain text HTML response is then sent back to the client with all of your normal HTML structure, CSS styling, and then the actual data and information that you are processing on the server. There is just so much stuff you can do with Thymeleaf. So this is really just an overview of the most common things that you'll want to do. Feel free to explore the documentation and the tutorials to find out what else you can do. Now, the curly braces part of the expression you learned earlier is a variable expression. Inside the curly braces, you can put any variable expression where the variable is referencing an object property or instance variable, a model attribute, an implicit object, etc. This expression can contain an actual value, or it can be an expression that evaluates to a value. This is the core of your Thymeleaf syntax. Therefore, variable expressions can contain operators. For example, all of the basic mathematical operators are supported. You'll see here in the table in the notes, I've listed some of the standard mathematical operators with some examples, just so you can get an idea. Some variable expressions can also evaluate to a Boolean value, so the standard relational operations are also supported. Note, however, that you can't place a less than symbol or a greater than symbol inside any HTML attribute value. So you'll have to use either character entities, like I've done here, or you can use alternative operators in text format, such as LT for less than and GT for greater than, and I'm going to outline these further down. Concatenation is also supported, as is several other string operations that we're going to look at later. But if you want to concatenate stuff in a Thymeleaf expression, you can just use the plus operator, just like in Java. But another cool thing you might want to try is literal substitution. With literal substitution, use this pipe or vertical line symbol. So basically here, what I'm doing in this particular expression is I'm assigning, we'll learn about these kinds of attributes a little bit later. This is a Thymeleaf attribute, and I am assigning the attribute a normal string value. However, I am building a string value with background color, the actual literal text background color, and appended to that will be whatever this expression evaluates to. This obviously is like cat.colorCode. It must be a color code property of some cat object or whatever. So whatever this contains or evaluates to, it'll just be tacked onto the end of that. So anything inside these two vertical lines is evaluated as if it was one expression. So it's going to take the literal background color and then concatenate or append it to this. This basically is equivalent to writing it this way, where I put the background color colon part has to go inside single quotes because we're already inside double quotes. So make sure you do that with single quotes. You probably are used to doing that when you coded with PHP, so that shouldn't be a big deal. So I take that string literal background color colon and then concatenate the value of this expression cat.colorCode. It's basically the same thing. Maybe the first one is a little easier to type, but honestly, if you prefer the second one, that's okay. You will eventually develop your own personal preference and just use whatever that is. Whichever one you use doesn't actually matter. I find the first one easier to type, but that's just me. You might prefer the second one. That's okay. So that's some of the basic syntax of Thymeleaf. I'm going to talk a little bit more as we learn more about Thymeleaf. But to start using Thymeleaf, you must import the Thymeleaf namespace into an HTML page that will contain the Thymeleaf code. This is generally done in the document's opening HTML element, just like you see here. Now, the XML_NS:/th defines the namespace for Thymeleaf attributes. The XML_NS stands for XML namespace, and XML, as you probably know, is for extensible markup language, which is a sort of sibling to HTML. They were both derived from standard generalized markup language, or SGML. HTML is used to structure documents and their contents, whereas XML is used to structure data. XML is often used to define the elements and attributes that are allowed in a certain kind of markup document, which is kind of what this is doing. This is defining the namespace where those rules for Thymeleaf are defined. A namespace is just like a package name. It's a unique identifier for something. In this case, the namespace for the XML that defines the attributes that we're allowed to use in Thymeleaf. Now, the TH after the colon is the attribute prefix that we'll be using. So all Thymeleaf attributes will start with the lowercase letter TH followed by a colon, and that's how you'll know a Thymeleaf attribute from a regular HTML attribute. Now this URL, www.thymeleaf.org, that's the Thymeleaf namespace. So as web technologies, we often use URLs and URIs as namespaces because it's unique. A URL or URI can only belong to exactly one entity. So here it's the Thymeleaf page, but they use it as a unique identifier like a package name. So this whole statement basically says, when you encounter any tag or attribute that starts with TH, you can determine how to process that attribute by looking at the definition within the namespace www.thymeleaf.org. This statement identifies where the rules are for Thymeleaf attributes, how they work, what data types they're allowed to have, and what they do. If you didn't add this to the HTML page where you want to use Thymeleaf, then the server wouldn't understand what to do when it encountered any tag or attribute that starts with TH. It wouldn't parse or process those attributes, and they'd appear in the response as is when sent back to the browser in the response body. So instead of using the square bracket syntax we learned earlier to display dynamic data, it's actually better to use HTML elements with Thymeleaf attributes, just like you see here. So here are two examples that do the same thing. One uses literal substitution and the other uses concatenation. As I said before, you'll eventually learn to prefer one over the other, but it doesn't matter right now what you do. Now, text is one Thymeleaf attribute. It's probably the most common one you're going to use, and it's generally the first one you learn. This attribute is how we access an element's inner HTML content. So this code here will display the literal value, item name, followed by whatever the expression inv.itemName evaluates to. The variable expression is evaluated, and then the result will be added after the item name : literal. Therefore, whatever value is inside inventory object item name will actually appear. And the same thing happens down here, except I'm using concatenation instead of the actual literal substitution. Now, if for some reason the Thymeleaf code is not parsed, for example, if there's an error on the server, if someone loads the page directly as a file, then the h1 element will contain the text inventory item instead, whatever is between the opening and closing tags. So the text inside the h1 element's opening and closing tags is ignored if Thymeleaf is processed. But this is useful as a fallback in case the Thymeleaf can't be interpreted. So it's always good to include something as fallback in between the opening and closing tags. So try this quick exercise. Update your previous example that we did in the previous video to use text instead of using the square bracket syntax in your output page. Don't forget to include fallback code as well. When you've got it working, take a look at the source code for your page just to see what it looks like. Go ahead and pause the video, give this a try, and then resume the video and we'll discuss the solution. Okay, so here I am back in the code from the previous exercise. Now, before we do anything, if I want to start using Thymeleaf, I'm going to have to make sure I add the Thymeleaf namespace. So XML and then NS for namespace, TH equals, and again, this goes in the opening HTML element tag, http thymeleaf.org. There we go. And now I can go, let me just So you can see all of that together. There. Now I can go ahead and edit this. So what I want to do is basically take this chunk from each one of my outputs and just put them in th text. I just copied and pasted. And then use whatever you want for fallback code, just like that. And then the next one, same thing. I'm just going to cut that out and th text. Variable expressions. So that's the whole inventory. Now this next one's going to be kind of interesting. I'm just going to shove the param name up here up at the top. Get that out of the way, because that actually, the first three are pretty straightforward. Oops. It's this last thing that's going to be interesting. There. All right, so this last one. So I can do this as one big th text. It's ugly, but it's doable. So I'm just going to put each one of these. And when you do the concatenation, because obviously I'm going to have to concatenate them together with a little space in between. The space is in single quotes. You do the concatenation outside. That's not part of your expression. I wonder if we could do it that way. There. I'm going to wrap this down here. You can totally do that. And then the last one. There. And then get rid of all this gunk and replace it with ID name quantity. So I can do it like this. So if I do it like that, like I said, it's a little bit ugly, but that's okay. Sometimes code is ugly. That's just the way it is. I'm going to give this a run. So localhost 8080, and I still have to come here through the form, even though we don't really care about that as much right now. Type a name, click submit, and there's my output. So you'll notice the first two lines of output we would have expected, but then you'll notice there's the line of output for the inventory items to string, which I didn't have to call, it was automatic. And then there's the ID, the item name, and the quantity separately. And again, if you right click and inspect, or you can, like I said, view source as well, you just see the text, right? That's it. Again, if you do view source, it's just the text. You don't see any of the Thymeleaf stuff. It's cool. This is cool. You don't want people to view source and see your Thymeleaf code. You don't want them to see how you did stuff. It's pretty neat. So again, it's a little bit messy, and that's just the way it is. So you still have to concatenate the values together, even if it's not just because of the space. You can't just do this. You can't just put the expressions side by side. That's like writing a piece of Java code, like, obviously don't type this, but that's like if I went system.out.println, I'm typing Java in my HTML. I can't just go A, B, C, right? I have to concatenate them together. I have to, like, concatenate these or whatever. I'm assuming A, B, and C are strings, but you can't do that. So we have to do this. But there is another way you can do this. There's a way you can do it. I showed you how to do this earlier with the literal substitution. So I could, for example, I don't know why that's not indented. There we go. I could do a P tag and then th text equals, and then what I do is do the pipe symbol, and then I'm just going to copy and paste again. I'm just going to copy paste the whole thing. It's easier to do that and then delete the bits I don't want. There we go. So this way, it actually is allowed because I'm doing the literal substitution here. So I'm using the pipe symbol to say I want you to print this, and then anything that's not an expression is literal. In this case, the spaces. Not the new line, because in the browser, that's just white space. Putting an actual enter key in HTML is just space. So you learned that in semester 1, hopefully. If not, ask me about it. So this is another way to do the exact same thing. So I'm just going to refresh, and I see the same thing twice, which is what I should see. And then another way you could do this, and oops, I just noticed I forgot the P tag, closing P tag there. Another way you could do this, if you're formatting some of this stuff with CSS, and let's say you want to format the way the ID looks different And then the quantity, you might want to add some code. You could totally do this. You might want to add some code that says if the quantity is of a certain range, maybe put it in bold or emphasis or something like that. So what you could do is inside a set of p tags or inside a paragraph element, you can put each individual expression in a span. If you remember span is like a div, but div is a block element and span is an inline element. So it's kind of cool. You can do that. So I just do my th text from my span, and then inside I just put each one of these. So the first span gets the item ID, like that. And then of course, each span needs fallback text, right? So just ID, just like that. And again, because you're inside a paragraph element, if you want a space after the ID, just type a space or press enter, because, you know, an enter is white space. And then I just have to change this to name. Oh, there we go. And one more for the quantity. I always hate copy paste to edit because I can type so much faster. There we go. All right, make sure I didn't accidentally forget to edit something. That's another reason why I don't like to copy paste edit. All right, save my changes. I guess if I did anything wrong, we're gonna find out because there'll be an error, and that's okay. There we go. So I get the exact same thing 3 times because I just showed you 3 different ways to write the same thing. So which one should you choose? It depends. I, as you know, because I've said it before, I like using the pipe symbol. It's just so much easier. But if I wanted to do some CSS formatting or something on the individual values, I would definitely do it with the spans. Cool. Now here's another interesting thing to make note of with the th text attribute. Normally when you use th text, any special HTML characters are automatically escaped, and this is a good thing. So if I had, for example, a model attribute, and for some reason I typed in HTML code, I mean, I'm using a model attribute because it's easy for us to demo, but imagine if you had a form and in the form's input, the user typed HTML code, because that's what some people do. They want to try and screw up your output page. So if that happened, if for some reason a model attribute or a parameter or something had HTML code in it, if we were to then print that using th text is smart. It will actually escape all of the HTML characters. So when you viewed the source for that, it's actually going to take the opening and closing pointy brackets around the span, the opening span, and the closing span tags, and it's going to escape them with character entities. Remember character entities? I just noticed I missed one here. Whoops. Oh no, there it is. There's the greater than. So there's the less than, the greater than, the less than, and the greater than. So you can do that. And then when you view that in the browser, you'll see, you don't see the paragraph element except that you'll see blank space above and below, but you'll actually see the text span class equals foo. This is how my web pages end up with HTML code being displayed and not being rendered as HTML as we use character entities. So that's what the th text does. Now there may be times when you maybe purposely don't want to have the text escaped, and that's okay. You can actually use the u text. So thu text, u means unescaped text. So you can use the version of th text that unescapes the text. And so if you did the exact same thing, have the exact same model attribute, and you use u text instead, it will actually treat the HTML like HTML. So it will output a paragraph element, and then inside the opening and closing tags of that paragraph element, it will render a span with some CSS class foo. Maybe it's a yellow background, I don't know. And then the word foo in there. So you would see the word foo in the paragraph element with whatever styling has been applied. You won't see the actual HTML characters being displayed. It maybe is a little difficult to understand verbally, so let's try a demo, of course. So I'm just going to use the same program, why not? So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our controller. So I'm editing this video, and you probably didn't notice, but that took a long time to go to my controller. I think I might have to restart my computer soon. And I'm just going to add any HTML you want. So add attribute. I'm just going to call it output so it matches what we saw in the presentation. And then I'm just going to put, how does this, let me do this. There we go. How does this display? Question mark. So I'm adding a model attribute called output. That's the key, output. And the value is a string object that happens to contain some HTML. Now I'm going to go over to my output page, and I'm going to put it up here so that we can see it right away. We don't have to search through all this other output. And I'm going to put in a paragraph, I'm going to add the THU text equals output. And I'm going to display the exact same thing using the regular TH text. There we go. I'm not going to do any fallback because who cares right now? I mean, if you want to just put like testing 1, testing 2, doesn't really matter because this is just a demonstration. So I'm going to display it first without escaping, or with escaping, and then I'm going to display it escaped. And we'll see how it renders differently. So I'm going to save. I'm going to go back to my output. I'm just going to refresh this page. And there we go. So there's the version with regular TH text. So you'll see that it actually displays the tag strong. But the second one, that's the one where I used utext, and it actually displays the word this in strong, which by default is bold unless you style it differently in your CSS. Furthermore, if I do a little inspect, or however you normally do it in your browser of choice, you'll notice, there we go. You'll notice that the first one, so this is the first one, you can tell because it gets that ugly orange around it. That's the margins. So you can see here, this is the actual text that's being displayed. But when you look at the second one, right away you can tell because the second one, it's got one of these arrows, which means it's nested tags. That's what you see when you see nested tags. And sure enough, I know it does this weird thing with the quotes. I won't get into that. It's got to do with the DOM and text nodes. But there it is. You can tell the difference between this just being text because it's in like just regular color. Whereas this, you can see it's got the purple tags around it. So that's how you know it's an actual element. So there you go. So that's kind of cool. So if you want to just, normally when you render stuff that has anything to do with any user inputs, even if it's something you calculated with user inputs, you should use TH text. But if you want to display actual HTML code and have it render, then you should use utext because it won't escape your HTML text. It's kind of cool. Now, another important thing that you might have discovered when you've been working with template pages is that you can't reference external resources the normal way, like you were taught in Web 1 and Web 2, when a page is in the templates directory. So this is, again, because of Thymeleaf and how templates work. So when you're referencing external resources, you actually have to use a URL expression. Be careful, it looks like a variable expression, but notice that it starts with the @ symbol instead of the $sign. $sign is a variable expression, @ symbol is a URL expression. There's other types as well. In the next lesson, I'll show you something called a select expression, which has an asterisk in front of it. So inside the curly braces, this is where you would put the URL, if it's an actual URL, or the location of the resource. Now, if the resource is a file as opposed to a URL, such as an image file or a CSS file, you have to make sure that it starts with the / because that's the context path. So in this case, when I say /images picture.jpg, that's from the context path. Look for the directory called images. Now, the context path for CSS and images, as you know, is the source main resources static directory. So you can't just say, go to the static directory and then go to the images directory. You have to say context path and then go to the images directory. Recall that all of your static resources, like your images, your scripts, and your CSS, always go in the static directory. And so that's the directory you're referencing when you put context path / in front of what you want to get. So in this case, / images picture.jpg means go to this location of the project and go into the images subdirectory and get whatever this picture is. So therefore, if you want to add an image to your HTML in a templates page using Thymeleaf, you would do something like this. So you can see here, I've got src source, so source equals, and then I've got the URL expression images my picture.jpg. Now note that you should still include the static version as fallback code. So this will work only if someone, whatever page this is on, if someone loads that page directly as a file into the browser, then this one will execute, because obviously the Thymeleaf is not processed because it didn't come from the server. So if the page was loaded on the client side, then that's where the fallback code would execute. So you would still see an image. Or if for some reason Thymeleaf wasn't working, then you would end up with this version. Obviously, they're pointing to the same image, but it would use the static version of source. Now you can do something similar, obviously, with CSS. So assuming you follow the industry standard and have a CSS or styles directory in your static directory, then you can link to a CSS file from any static page normally, but from a templates page, you would have to do something like you see here. You'd have to make sure that you use the th-href. And once again, notice that you should also include the normal static href as fallback code. So earlier I mentioned attribute modifiers. So this is another really useful way to use Thymeleaf. So all of the HTML5 attributes, again, I think it's all of them. They say most, but like I said, I haven't come across one that doesn't have a Thymeleaf attribute. But all of these HTML5 attributes, they all have a Thymeleaf version. So for example, there's like thClass, thname, thid, thaction, alt4, href pattern, placeholder, source, style, target, title, value. I mean, I could just list attributes and I'd be here for about an hour because there's so many. So obviously I can't list them all. But all of these attributes you can actually use as Thymeleaf attributes so that you can put Thymeleaf code in those attributes. For example, if you want to change the alt of an image or the title based on data that came from the server, just use the Thymeleaf version of the attribute. So for example, if I have a form element, like an input, for example, and then what I want to do is I want to display the inventory object's item name in the value. So I basically want to pre-populate the input element of a form with the inventory object's item name. I can totally do that. I just use thValue. Of course, you also have to specify the static version of value or the non-Thymeleaf version of value as fallback, just in case. It's always a good idea to include fallback code. Now here's where things get super interesting. You can perform selections using a Thymeleaf attribute, or basically just if statements. It's really cool. So the thif attribute allows you to display the element it's attached to only if the condition in the quotes is true. Does that sound cool? Here's an example. Here I have a link ahref equals whatever, and then what I've done is I've added thif, and this expression, bill amount, remember that we can't say the greater than symbol, so I just use GT for greater than. If bill amount, whatever that is, a model attribute probably, if bill amount is greater than 0, if that's true, then it will render the entire tag, the entire element. But if bill amount greater than 0 is not true, none of this is rendered at all. It does not appear in the browser. It doesn't appear in the source at all. It's just not rendered. It's just not there. Now note that I use thhref with a URL expression, and I've also included the fallback href as well, which again, that's pretty standard. My Thymeleaf href is using a mapping, so that's probably mapped to something in my controller. Obviously, it's mapped to something in my controller. So something in my controller is going to execute when the user clicks this link. Now, with the thif, it can evaluate any valid Boolean condition or expression using relational operators, logical operators, etc. But just note these interesting bits of information. Any numeric expression that is non-zero is evaluated as true. So for example, if I have the expression number times 2, that will evaluate to true, assuming number is actually a number, and it contains a non-zero value. If number is 0, then that expression evaluates to 0, and that actually gets evaluated to false. If you've had some experience programming with weakly typed or loosely typed languages like JavaScript and PHP, then this might seem a bit familiar to you because those languages actually work the same way. Another thing that's very similar, any char value or expression that is non-zero or non-null is also evaluated as true. So if you have like the single character A, that's considered true, but a character 0 or the \0, which is the char value for null, that's actually false. Now, I know in the older expression language, before we were using Spring, there was an expression language that this is based off of. And in that language, it was just called expression language. It's called EL. In that expression language, the same thing thing was true of strings. So with a string, if a string actually contained the string value 0, or if it was a null string, then that would also be considered false. I haven't seen that documented, but just based on everything else, I'm pretty sure that's still the case. We'll have to try it out at some point to make sure. But speaking of strings, if your string contains the word false, the word off, or the word no, that's actually evaluated as false. Everything else is considered true. So if your string has another word or words in it, those are true, but any one of these 3 words is automatically considered false. That's pretty cool. And any non-string, non-character, non-number, non-boolean, so basically object, is evaluated as true. So if you have an object like an expression with just inv, the inventory object, that's considered true, unless that object is null. If that object is not pointing to anything in memory, if it's a null object reference, then it's evaluated as false. So that's kind of a neat way you can actually use thif to see if this object is null or not. Again, that's pretty common in a lot of other languages that you might already be familiar with. All right, let's try a new exercise. This exercise is described in the notes as well, in case you need to read it instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a form, a different kind of form, to our current project called inventory.html, or you can call it whatever you like. And we're going to add input fields for the item ID, the item name, and then the quantity. And we're going to add a submit button, of course. So the user's going to be typing in information for a new inventory item. When they click submit, that's going to be mapped to a handler method in our controller. The form's handler method is going to receive the 3 parameters that were input by the user, and it's going to use them to construct an instance of the inventory class. So I think we were constructing an instance of inventory manually. Now we're going to use input parameters to do it. And then we're going to store that inventory object in the model, which I think we're already doing anyway. The handler method should then load the output page. You can create a different output page, or you can use the same output page. Doesn't matter. If you're using a new output page, then go ahead and add the output page. And what you're going to do is, in the output page, you're going to add code to display a message if the item's quantity is 0 or less. And your message should be something like, you need to order more blank, where blank is whatever the item name is. So you're going to replace the item name in your sentence. And then have something good for a fallback, like you need to order more of something, or you're running out, something that makes sense. Now, regardless of the value of quantity, you'll notice here in this example, you're still going to display the actual item's toString. So you'll notice if you enter a quantity that's greater than 0, your output is just going to be the actual item as a string. So go ahead and pause the video, try the exercise, and then resume the video when you're finished, and I'll show you my solution. Okay, here I am with my inventory form. I just mapped it to output rather than creating a whole new output form. That's totally fine. So here's my form. I've got fields for item ID, item name, and for the quantity. In my controller, I added parameters. We never did use the name parameter, that's fine. I added parameters for the item ID, the item name, and quantity. Again, the names of these parameter variables have to match your form name attribute values. I use those 3 things to construct a new inventory object, and then I add that as an attribute to my model using the add attribute method, and then I go to my output form. In my output form, I already had this part done, so I just left it in there. The next part, this is the interesting bit. So what I want to do is I want to open a paragraph and then put in a thif. So my condition, if the inventory item's quantity is less than 0. So if, and I'm going to do my inventory item.quantity. Now you have to do LE. You can't do less than or equal to, because you can't put the less than or greater than symbol inside an HTML attribute value, or a Thymeleaf attribute value for that matter. So you can either do it this way, which is just awkward, or I just use LE. LT is less than, LE is less than or equal to, and 0. Finish that off. And then if that's true, it's going to render this whole element. So this element needs some text. It needs some inner HTML. So what am I going to be displaying? Order. Oh, I want to use this guy. It's easier. Order more of. And then inventory item.item name. And making sure I open and closed everything. There we go. All right, and I need some fallback. I'm just going to put it right here. Order more of those. Huh, there we go. Oh, I should put a little exclamation point here too. All right, there we go. So if this condition is true, then it will render this entire element. But if the condition is false, it will not render any of this at all, which is kind of neat. Let's try it out. Now, when you go to localhost, just refresh so that you get your form. I'm going to type in an item ID of 2 and an item name. What's on my desk? Sharpie marker in black. How many? None, which is a lie. There's 1, but I'm going to put 0. Submit. There we go. There's my inventory item, and there's my order more Sharpie markers in black. Now, what's really cool is I probably could have formatted this. So if I wanted to add some formatting, I just happen to already have an HTML. Because we style with HTML, Wendy. A CSS file. Link rel equals style sheet. Gotta get rid of that extra quote there. And include the regular href, right? And just do the whole static CSS main.css. I've already created the CSS file. I think I said that already. And then we include the Thymeleaf version href equals, and then do a URL expression, CSS, and main.css. Just like that. And I happen to also have some form stuff formatted, so I'm gonna, whoops. Oh, did I do that here too? Sometimes I accidentally put it below the head. All right, now I happen to have added a class equals error. I already added a class. Obviously I did this exercise before. So I actually added a little error class to make it look nice. You didn't have to do all that, but it's something fun to try. I'm just gonna refresh this. Now I have a nice spiffy new form. So I'll just put Sharpie, I have none. And ta-da! Order more of Sharpie. Sure. And then, I don't know why I put it that way. Like this, I can put in more than 0, and there you go. Ta-da! Cool. So that's the if statement. So I mentioned in the notes that there's actually a couple of other selection attributes that you might want to try, along with a few more exercises. So when you get some free time, go have a look at those. Now you can also do iteration in Thymeleaf. You can iterate through any kind of collection of objects or values, and it's really easy using the each attribute. Now it has a special syntax. So the syntax of each is you put each equals, and then in the quotes, a variable for each item, and then a colon, and then the name of the array or collection that you're iterating. It's pretty much exactly like a for each loop in Java. So in this case, array refers to any array, list, or any other collection or anything that implements java.util.iterable or anything that's implements or inherits from enumeration. So any enumeration will work as well. Anything that's not one of those things is just treated like a list with only one object inside it or one element inside it. Item contains the current element or object for the current iteration. Again, it's just like a for each loop. The item is only visible inside the element in which this each attribute is used. So it's local to that element and any nested elements inside it. So again, it's just like a for each loop. So for example, this code will iterate through a collection that's called inventory list, where the inventory object in each iteration is referenced by the variable inv, and a div element for each inventory object in the list is created or rendered, displaying the item name and the quantity. So one div per inventory object in the list. So this isn't going to create only one div for everything. It creates one of these divs for every single item in the list. It's very cool. Now notice that the item variable inv, it's not in a variable expression. It's not inside the quotes. That's because we're basically like defining the variable, but inventory list is because it's referring to a stored attribute, like a model attribute or some other variable that already exists. Now there's also a loop status variable that you can use if you want the current iterations count or index. If you want to use it, all you do is you just add this extra status variable. You don't have to call it status. You can call it anything you want. Just put whatever variable you want to use for item and then a comma and then the variable name you want to use for the status. Don't put a space in there, it won't work. Just comma, no space. So you just define a new variable for the status. Now that status variable actually has properties. It has quite a few properties actually. So it has an index property, which is the 0-based index. So the first iteration is 0, the second iteration is 1, etc. It also has a count. So the count is very similar, but it's 1-based. So the first iteration is 1, the second iteration is 2, etc. And then there's also size, which is basically the number of elements that you're iterating through. So it's like the array.length or the list.size, basically. There's also a property called current, which gives you access to the current object that you're iterating. It's basically equivalent to item, whatever you called item, it's the same thing. And then there's also some Boolean properties. Even and odd, they indicate whether the current iteration is an even one or an odd number, or an odd one. So it'll be like even will be true if you're on an even iteration, or false if you're on an odd iteration. There's also first and last. So first is true when you're on the first iteration, and last is true when you're on the last iteration. So here's just a really quick example using a couple of these. So in this code, we're iterating through inventory list again, and each object is referenced by the variable inv, just like before, but I've also created the status variable called stat. And we're displaying, it's some kind of list, we can't tell what, but we see li, so that's obviously a list item. So some kind of list with a list item for each inventory object in the inventory list. And each list item's text is the 1-based index, so 1, 2, 3, 4, followed by the inventory item name. And then also, we've added a CSS class. Again, I'm using th class and not just class because there's a Thymeleaf expression inside the attribute value, so I have to use th class. And that expression is, again, this is where the odd and even are really handy, so I use stat.odd. So basically, if that's true, it's going to apply the highlight class that's defined somewhere in my CSS. But if odd is false, if it's an even row, it doesn't apply any highlighting. Basically, it creates a zebra list. So let's try a different exercise. I want you to add a handler method to your controller that just manually creates a list of book objects. So you just create a bunch of books and add them to a list. Remember to do list and then copy on right array list. And then you can use the Lombok version of your book bean, so just copy it over into this current project. And it might be easier just for this exercise if you want to add an all-args constructor to it if you haven't already done that. And then add an output page or use the existing output page where you display the list of books in an HTML table with columns for each book data member. Now here's a hint. What are you repeating for each book object? You're repeating the TR, the table row, right? And then what you can do is when you create your table data elements inside the TR, you can reference the individual properties. So like book.isbn, book.title, book.author, etc., etc. Go ahead and pause the video and give this a try, and then resume the video and I'll show you my solution. Okay, so here in my controller, I actually created a new handler method. I didn't feel like going through the form because we're not actually using a form for this one. It doesn't really matter how you did it. So I created a new handler method for this one with a model parameter. I created a book list and then just added a bunch of books on the fly. You don't need to store these books in a variable because you're going to add them to the model or to the book list, which you're then going to add to the model. So it doesn't matter. So I just made up 3 books. And then I added each book to the list, and then I took the book list and I added it to my model, and then I'm using the same output page. Easy peasy. So in my output page, here's how I did the table. So I start with my table, and then I just added, I like to have a little header row with the name of the list, in this case, book list. And then I did my normal table headers, right? Like you normally would. I guess doesn't really matter. We know what's at the end there, but just in case. And then what you do is a tr, and then you use the th each, and I just used b. I don't need the status variable, so I just didn't use it, but b represents each book in the list. So b in book list, because that's what I called the book list I added to my model. The key name is book list. So for each book b in book list, and then I just did a bunch of TDs, where for each TD, th text equals, and I picked each one gets its own thing. So b book.isbn, the title, the author, the price, the genre, etc. There we go. So when we run it, I've already run it because I wanted to make sure it works. That's what I get as my output because I also have all nice and formatted with CSS. Now, It would be nice if I could format the numbers. Like, that looks kind of stupid. I could maybe format them with currency. That would be kind of cool. You can do that. One of the last cool things you can do with Thymeleaf is utility objects. So utility objects are already built in. They're objects that you can use for common tasks such as working with dates and times, formatting numbers, string operations, and then there's a whole bunch that deal with array, list, and map operations as well. There's a lot of these objects. I think there's like 10 or 15 of them, but I've only included some of them in the notes. And I'm just going to show you a couple of quick examples because really it's just a matter of reading what they can do. The rest is easy. Feel free to explore the others because, like I said, there's some in the notes. I've included documentation, tutorials, and some other stuff to help you get to know these different utility objects. So to use the utility objects, they all start with a number sign. So I'll just go through a couple of quick examples. So in this case, if I want to use the utility object numbers, I just do hashtag or number sign, and then the name of the object. In this case, it's called the numbers object. Think of it like in JavaScript, you have the date class and the array class and all that kind of stuff. Same kind of thing, exactly the same sort of thing. So it's just, they're notated differently. Number sign and then numbers or hashtag numbers. And then they all have methods. They come with several methods. So this is a method called format currency. So if I want to use that method, I just put the name of the object with the hashtag in front, a dot, and then the name of the method. And if the method needs any arguments or whatever, then you just put them in. Like in this case, INV inventory object, probably dot price. So what this does is it takes the value inside the price property of this inventory object, passes it to format currency, and format currency will format inventory price with a $sign and 2 decimal places. That easy. And you put that inside an expression. In this case, it's in a variable expression. So for example, if I wanted to display the inventory price formatted with a $sign and 2 decimal places inside a div or a span or whatever, here it's a div, I just go div text equals and then plop that expression in there. It's that simple. I'll show you one more example using the strings object. So there is an object called strings with an S. It's confusing, I know, because you're used to Java, it's called string. But here it's called strings. And one of the methods I really like is the default string method. So what the default string method does is you give it 2 strings. The first thing is what you want to display. And the second thing is what you should display if the first thing is empty. It's really neat. So what this will do is if you have, I think this is from the appointments exercise, the student appointments. So appointment.topic. If that's empty or null, it will display no topic instead. Otherwise, it'll display what's ever in appointment.topic. So I could use that again in a div, a span, a paragraph, whatever. Text equals. So display either appointment.topic, or if appointment.topic is null, it'll display the words, the string literal, no topic. So in the notes in the utility objects page, I listed the ones I thought you might, somebody's car alarm's going off outside, I don't know if you can hear it. I listed the ones I thought would probably be the ones you would use most often with a couple of examples of how they work. One of these, this links to the documentation, and the tutorial link obviously links to a tutorial on how it works. So you can see there's all the ones that I thought you might find the most useful. So feel free to explore those. You'll find some of the extra exercises in the notes actually encourage you to go and look some of that stuff up. For example, the one we just did with the books. Now you know how to format the price of each book with a $sign and 2 decimal places. So you could try that. Now, also in the notes for this lesson, I've added 3 more comprehensive exercises. One uses a new class called the container class. I use this a lot in semester 3 because it's nice and easy. And so it's a lot of the same stuff. You input something on a form, you do some processing, and then display some information on the output page. And then this one's kind of cool. It doesn't use a bean at all. I used this one way back when I started teaching JSP. I would use this exercise, and I kind of like it. The user has a form where they enter a minimum and maximum value. So you want to generate numbers. So how many numbers do you want? So this one, the user wants to generate 50 random numbers between 1 and 100. You click submit, and then it just displays the random numbers on a screen so someone can copy paste and do whatever they want with them. So that's kind of cool, but that doesn't use a bean. So it's one of the few applications you're going to be doing without a bean or a model, but you could probably create one. Wouldn't be a bad thing. And then, the adoption program. I know you love this application. So there's a modification to the adoption program that you're going to really like. So that one's kind of cool as well. So there you go. So there's some exercises for you to practice with. There's also a few extra things in the notes, and I've mentioned this several times throughout the video. There's several things in the notes that we just don't have time to cover everything. So do make sure you go through the notes in addition to watching this video now that you're finished it. You're at that stage now in your programming experience where you should be comfortable reading documentation to help you discover what you can do with certain things and how they work. So that's kind of why that's there. Now we'll be using Thymeleaf in pretty much every project we do from here on. So make sure you do all the practice exercises. Like I said, there's several little exercises throughout each page, and then there's the 3 bigger ones at the end on the last page. We'll continue looking at how we can create dynamic web pages in the next video by doing form binding. So we're just going to continue where we left off. Form binding is cool. It allows you to link model attributes between the input form controller and the output page. It's really cool. Until then, thanks for watching.